The firm platform, calculation, and observation of biblical time. 7 evidences based on the principles of true education. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15. Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. The firm platform of Revelation chapter 14, verses 6 to 12. The 2300 days of Daniel chapter 8, verse 14, calculated in Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 to 27, reaching to October 22nd, 1844, the great day of atonement, the day of judgment. The firm platform. The purpose of this research is to establish the firm platform of Revelation chapter 14, verses 6 to 12, as revealed by the Creator to the Millerites through the great day of atonement, day of judgment, which began on October 22nd, 1844. Any attempt to ascertain biblical time without calculation and observation combined is entirely false. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 19. We have also a more sure word of prophecy, whereunto you do well that ye take heed, as unto a light that shineth in a dark place, until the day dawn and the day star arise in your hearts. 2 Chronicle chapter 20, verse 20. The perfect vision. Believe in the Lord your God, so shall he be established. Believe his prophets, so shall he prosper. The Great Controversy, page 409. The scripture, which above all others had been both the foundation and central pillar of the Advent faith, was a declaration, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Daniel chapter 8, verse 14. Calculation and observation of biblical time. 7 evidences. Evidence number 1, the sure word of prophecy. Evidence number 2, the firm platform of Revelation chapter 14. Evidence number 3, synchronism and chronology. Evidence number 4, the solid foundation, the 2300 days. Evidence number 5, the flood. Evidence number 6, the Mazzaroth. Evidence number 7, Messiah's birth and death. Notice that all these evidences are based on calculation and observation. Evidence number 1, prophecy based on calculation and observation. 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 19 to 21. We have also a more sure word of prophecy, whereunto you do well that ye take heed, as unto a light that shineth in a dark place, until the day dawn and the day star arise in your hearts. Knowing this first, that no prophecy of the Scripture is of any private interpretation, for the prophecy came not in old time by the will of men, but holy men of God spake as they were moved by the Holy Ghost. Biblical prophecies related to time. The longest time prophecy, the 2300 days of Daniel chapter 8, verse 14, as explained in Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 to 27, and is directly connected to the prophecy of Revelation chapter 14, verses 6 to 12, announcing the hour of his judgment and worship time. The first time prophecy connected with the first biblical synchronism and chronology. The flood was prophesied by Noah for 120 years, and it occurred in Genesis chapter 7 and chapter 8. The Mazzaroth represent the first 3 books of the plan of salvation written by the Creator in the heavenly constellations, along with the moon and the sun. Psalm 147 verse 4 says, He telleth the number of the stars, He calleth them all by their names. The word Mazzaroth is found, among others, in Job chapter 38, verse 32. Messiah's birth and death was the promise in Genesis 3:15 and was fulfilled by the birth, life, death, and resurrection of Christ, the Son of God, manifested in the flesh and proclaimed by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and others. Evidence number 2, the firm platform. Revelation chapter 14, calculated in Daniel chapters 8 and 9. Early Writings, page 258. Notice how many times the word platform is used in these two paragraphs. I saw a company who stood well guarded and firm, giving no countenance to those who would unsettle the established faith of the body. God looked upon them with approbation. I was shown 3 steps, the first, second, and third angels' messages. Said my accompanying angel, woe to him who shall move a block or stir a pin of these messages. The true understanding of these messages is of vital importance. The destiny of souls hangs upon the manner in which they are received. I was again brought down through these messages and saw how dearly the people of God had purchased their experience. It had been obtained through much suffering and severe conflict. God had led them along step by step until he had placed them upon a solid, immovable platform. I saw individuals approach the platform and examine the foundation. Some, with rejoicing, immediately stepped upon it. Others commenced to find fault with the foundation. They wished improvements made, and then the platform would be more perfect and the people much happier. Some stepped off the platform to examine it and declared it to be laid wrong. But I saw that nearly all stood firm upon the platform and exhorted those who had stepped off to cease their complaints. For God was the master builder and they were fighting against him. They recounted the wonderful work of God which had led them to the firm platform, and in union raised their eyes to heaven and with a loud voice glorified God. This affected some of those who had complained and left the platform, and they with humble look again stepped upon it. 7 times the word platform is used in these 2 paragraphs. Evidence number 2, the firm platform. Revelation chapter 14, calculated in Daniel chapters 8 and 9. And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people, saying with a loud voice, Fear God and give glory unto him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made heaven and earth and the sea and the fountains of waters. And there followed another angel, saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If any man worship the beast and his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation. And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever. And they have no rest day nor night, who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Evidence number 2, the solid foundation of the platform, is found in Daniel chapter 8, verse 14, the 2300 days. Calculation and observation. With Jesus in his sanctuary, page 217, Leslie Harding. Along with the calculation of the biblical calendar, the Hebrew sages record that eyewitnesses were to fix the time of every new moon. Following the return from captivity from Babylon, the Sanhedrin were accustomed to meet at the temple in the hall of polished stones on the eve of the 29th of each month to await the observers. Charts and pictures of the appearance of the crescent hanging in the evening sky had been developed through the years. These were used to check the evidence. Once two siders had agreed and the interlocutors were satisfied, the festival was announced. But should no credible evidence be forthcoming, the day was reckoned to the previous month, which was then described as full or of 30 days. On the following evening, the silver sickle was easily seen by observation, and the chief of the court announced the new month with the formula, "It is sanctified," to which the people present responded, "It is sanctified, it is sanctified." Then the ram's horn or shofar proclaimed that the month had commenced. And the quote, Rosh, comes from Rosh Hashanah, which is designated here as Rosh. Evidence number 3, biblical synchronism and chronology, calculation, times and seasons, biblical chronology. Biblical chronology is one of the perfect methods the Creator chose to plant His calendar in the sacred word, and which was restored in the 1800 era. The explanation of the longest time prophecy of Daniel chapter 8 verse 14 and the 2300 days is found in Daniel chapter 9 verses 24 to 27. Its starting date is based on verse 25 and read thus: "Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times." That commandment or decree is found in Ezra chapter 7 verse 8 and corresponds to 457 BC and its terminal point of October 22nd, 1844, Gregorian reckoning. These dates cannot be impeached. To borrow the words of Lynn Harper Wood, found in the Grace Amadon Collection, Part 4, page 19, we read, "There seems to be no other date in history that has been more firmly established, both from the biblical and history standpoints, than this 7th year of Artaxerxes." When one realizes that 457 BC is the starting point of the great 2300-day prophecy, reaching from that time down past the crucifixion, April 26, 31 AD, Julian Gregorian reckoning, to the time of the great judgment hour, October 22nd, 1844, Gregorian reckoning, one is deeply impressed with the infinite care taken by the Lord in preserving such an important record as this. Make sure to look into the link for further understanding of Breaking the Code, Biblical Synchronism and Chronology. Evidence number 3, Biblical Synchronism and Chronology calculation. The Grace Amadon Collection, Part 4, page 19. Biblical, astronomical, chronological, and historical data of synchronisms, eclipses, accession years of Egyptian, Babylonian, Persian, and Hebrew kings used to illustrate 457 BC are based on the books of 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles, Esther, Ezra, Nehemiah, and from the prophets Isaiah to Malachi inclusively. This in-depth study was done by the Millerites in order to know and understand the date of the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem, according to the prophecy of Daniel chapter 9 verse 25, and points to the 7th year of Artaxerxes as found in Ezra chapter 7, verse 8. Using the chronology of the Millerites in the 1800s and of Lynn Harper Wood in 1939, one can discover from the many synchronisms hidden within the pages of biblical writs amazing and surprising conclusions never thought of before. One of these discoveries is the synchronism of the major and minor prophets, and now they are all connected with chronology and time periods under a divine organized purpose, and of course pointing to the date of 457 BC. The major prophet being Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel. Minor prophet Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk. Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, and other prophets mentioned, Ezra and Nehemiah. We encourage you again to follow this link in order to understand the great information and the great knowledge presented to us through the biblical synchronism and chronology, specifically pointing to 457 BC. Evidence number 3, biblical synchronism and chronology calculation. Conclusion, the Grace Amadon Collection, Part 6. The 457 BC starting point of the prophecy of Daniel chapter 9, verse 25, was the solid foundation laid by the seventh month movement heralds of the first angel's message. And this foundation makes up the platform of Revelation chapter 14, 457 BC, 408 BC, 27 AD, 31 AD, 34 AD, 1798, and 1844, and reached to October 22nd, 1844. Such was the sure position maintained and strengthened by the pioneers of the third angel's message, as the advancing light on the sanctuary truth explained the nature of the event which had actually transpired on that all-important day in the heavenly sanctuary above, and which now involved the testing truth of the Sabbath. And such is the foundation of the great threefold message that is to be proclaimed with ever-increasing power and certainty to the very end of our witness. Viewed from every angle, the substantiating verities in regard to the sanctuary question stand forth in towering majesty to the honor of God. This aggressive banner of truth stands without impeachment in the midst of the collapsing and growing uncertainties all about us. We are a people with a heavenly message and a divine mandate to which we must adhere with unswerving allegiance. This was written in 1939 by the chairman of the Committee on the Validity of the Position of October 22nd in 1844, and it was written by Eli Froom. Though written in 1939, it echoes what was happening then, just before the Second World War, and what we are actually going through now in 2022 at the time of this presentation. We encourage you to visit those two links, which are Advanced Study of Synchronism and Chronology of the Bible, pointing to 457 BC and October 22nd, 1844. And this is presented in PDF format with audio and with video formats with audio. Evidence number 4, the solid foundation of the platform found in Daniel chapter 8, verse 14, the 2300 days, the calculation pointing to October 22nd in 1844. Letters and Manuscripts, Volume 1. While initial expectations of Jesus' return looked to the Jewish year beginning with the spring of 1843 and ending in the spring of 1844, Recalculation of the time prophecies eventually pointed to the fall of 1844, October 22nd specifically, as the true date for Christ's second advent. The Grace Amadon Collection, Part 2, pages 13 to 15. The writings of the Christian Jewish scholar Joseph Samuel C. F. Frey exerted a marked influence upon Snow and his associates in fixing upon October 22nd, 1844, as the precise 10th day of the 7th month fulfillment of the atonement octonal type, in parallel to the death of Christ as our great antitypical Passover lamb, accomplished historically on the exact year, month, day, and even hour specified in prophecy. Writing on October 14, 1844, 8 days before the 22nd, just before the disappointment, Himes states in the Advent Herald that he had inserted in several daily papers in Boston an explanation of the Adventist expectation concerning October 22nd. It was the exactness of this Passover fulfillment that had won Frey to Christianity, as he calculated the crucifixion year on the basis of the 70-week prophecy and year day principle, and the month and day on the basis of the stipulated 14th day of the first month for the sacrifice of the typical Passover, as found in Exodus chapter 12. This gave force to Snow's paralleling contention regarding the Atonement Day, which had been previously intimated by Miller. The references are found in Snow, True Midnight Cry, August 22nd, 1844, page 4, 2 months before October 22nd, and the Advent Herald, October 2nd, 1844, page 71, and Midnight Cry, October 10, 1844, page 105. So therefore, we stand on that solid foundation, pointing to the platform and calculating October 22nd in 1844 in advance. It was observed on the October 22nd as far as the expectation of the second advent, but it was calculated before time. Just like we are trying to demonstrate here, calculation and observation. Evidence number 4, the solid foundation making up the platform of Revelation chapter 14, as found in Daniel chapter 8, verse 14, the 2300 days, and explained in Daniel chapter 9. This platform, or this foundation, evidence number 4, the solid foundation of Daniel chapters 8 and 9, the 2300 days, which forms the platform for Revelation chapter 14, verses 6 to 12. The validity of the position of October 22nd, 1844 establishes all of the rules of correspondence for those who intend to ascertain the true biblical calendar based on calculation and observation. This is the pattern, 1844, the pattern to follow in order to ascertain the right reckoning for the biblical calendar year by year, both for the spring feast and the fall feast and all the 7-day Sabbaths, and even the beautiful sabbatical year and jubilee. Any attempt to ascertain the biblical time without calculation or observation combined and these rules of correspondence is entirely false. We will now proceed with the rules of correspondence. The data that we have been using here for these charts are from the U.S. Naval Observatory for 1844 and must be analyzed with chart number 1 and chart number 2 side by side. Chart number 1 being the phases of the moon for 1844 and chart number 2 being the fraction of the moon illuminated. It is evident by the time of the spring feast and the fall feast, which seems to be late in 1844, that 1844 was an embollismic year. We have a study on this, which we give you here, the link for your perusal. We have actually 3 links if you want to check us out or increase your knowledge if you have not been acquainted yet with the biblical calendar. We are showing you here how to proceed for a common year and an embollismic year with the cycles of the moon, which we will not do here. But 1844, even according to the Millwright, was an embollismic year, or a leap year, or an intercalary year, as they would call it in the Hebrew language. So therefore, when we compare now chart number 1 of the phases of the moon for 1844 and chart number 2 with the fraction of the moon illuminated, we will be establishing a very, very important rule of correspondence, which can be used in the future for any reckoning. So when we compare chart number 1 and chart number 2, the color yellow is used to identify the new moon, which is visible the next day on chart number 2. And this also applies for not only the new moon or the astronomical new moon or the conjunction, the black moon, but also for the first quarter, for the full moon, and for the last quarter. And this rule of correspondence is the way to ascertain the fact is when the new moon, or the first column here, when the new moon is at 11th hour or beyond, the rule of correspondence in chart number 2 confirms this fact because the moon will be now shown being visible a day later than the phases of the moon in chart number 1. And this, as we mentioned, applies for the different phases of the moon. We want to remind you that the day and the time that we're working with are always universal time, corresponding to Gregorian reckoning at midnight. And then it can be converted to sunset as we proceed with the biblical calendar. Now, as we continue with the chart, we're going to make it very clear. And first, before we touch on 1844, specifically for the spring and the fall feast, we will look at the chart and why we chose to have the yellow and the aqua color for the new moon and the full moon, and how to read these particular data. We're going to start with January 19, always in 1844, and it reads 18 hours and 18 minutes for January 19. And this is again the phases of the moon for 1844 in chart number 1. Now we're going to go for January 19 in 1844 for the fraction of the moon illuminated, where we read as being 0.01. The fraction of the moon for the black moon or conjunction or astronomical new moon is 0.00 always. And the numbers are not that great. It's not that expanded. It's simply from 0 to 00, and then 1.00 will be the full moon, and then it starts decreasing again to return to the conjunction. We're going to choose for this presentation to call it simply the conjunction, which you know is the black moon. So here in this case, we're going to explain clearly the rule of correspondence. The chart number 1 was showing 18 hours and 18 minutes for January 1844 to be able to see, with a telescope of course, the black moon or the conjunction. However, the fraction of the moon illuminated for universal time at midnight, just the same as for the phases of the moon, shows being on the 20th. Why is that? Well, because again, 18 hours and 18 minutes is later than 11th hour. This is the rule of correspondence. The next one showing that is yellow, we bypass February and March because they're definitely earlier than 11th hour or 11 o'clock. They're at 8 hours, 46 minutes and 17 minutes respectively. So we're going to go to April now with on the 17th at 16 hours and 32 minutes. For the phases of the moon, 1844. Chart number 2, as we go now to find the column for April, because February, March, if you were to read them, it's absolutely identical to what we've seen here on the phases of the moon. So we're going to go to April. In April, the new moon, the first new moon we see is the conjunction. In April 17 at 1632, that's when we read it in the chart of the phases of the moon. However, on the 17th of April 1844, it reads 0.01, which is part of the old moon or the old month. It shows 0.0 on the 18th of April. It is not a mistake. It is because in April 17, the moon was calculated as being 1632, which is after the 11th hour rule of correspondence. So in April, then, we read the 18, which is correct, the next day. And then we proceed with the crescent moon, the first visible crescent, which would show at 0.02, which is very early. It could not be seen all over the world. That's what universal time intends to show. And we go to the next timing that we have here, the next data, and we can see that it falls on the 20th of April. And then that would have been celebrated if they were to celebrate the new moon or the new year from the 20th to the 21st, midnight to midnight, or sunset to sunset for the conversion. And if it was strictly biblical language, you would say simply the first of the first month, which is always identical to the new year. Sunset to sunset. You wouldn't be involved with two dates like the Gregorian reckoning. However, we are under a Gregorian reckoning and we convert it and it works really well. So therefore, we're going to continue here with the 0.00 just to establish them so that you can be grounded from month to month, and we will come back to explain 1844 and the Passover. I'm going to go now to July 15 because May and June, we should say. May and June, it was at 8:53 and 26 minutes, so that's on time. That would have been observed on that day for the black moon, the conjunction. Now we go to July. July the 15th showing 14 hours and 24 minutes according to the rule of correspondence. It is later than the 11th hour. So just to make sure, we want to check everything so you can see May and June. The 0.00 is exactly where it was established on the 17th and here on the 16th. But July, if you try to read it on the 15th, what you have is 0.00 and 0.00. Which one to choose? Well, obviously, on the 14th, it was at 0.03. So the moon would be showing in the sky, and then this 0.00 belonged to the old moon or month, which means the same in Hebrew. And here we have 0.00 on the 16th. It's perfect. So July the 15th, according to the phases of the moon in chart number 1, because it's at 1424, past the rule of correspondence of 11th hour, then it will be observable according to the fraction of the moon illuminated on the 16th. Remember, this is calculation, phases of the moon. This is observation, fraction of the moon illuminated. Exactly what we have demonstrated thus far and illustrated thus far in this study. Now, September, let's go to September because we see that August, it remains the same on the 14th as what it shows on our chart on the left here at 2:32, so it can be seen on the 14th of August. So we're not going to touch that, but we're going to go now to September, October, being that they are two yellow. And again, September, October on the phases of the moon shows 13:17 for September, right here. And October 11 at 23:25, which is way after the 11th hour. So that's why here, rather than being on September 11, it shows September 12, it shows on the 13th, and October 11, it shows on the 12th at 0.00. It is maybe complex, but it's not complicated once you can read those numbers. And you finish, if you like, with December, which is the last month here with a 0.00 yellow. And in December, it shows the 9th at 2013. The 9th at 2013. So we're going to go here with the yellow. We're going to go to December at 2013 on the 9th. And we can see the 9th that it's still the old moon at 0.01. But on the 10th, it's at 0.00. So what we're interested now is to have established this, which is the rule of correspondence. We can do the same with the full moon. That's a good exercise if you wish to do it. And it corresponds again to the same rule of correspondence. When it's on or beyond 11th hour, Gregorian reckoning, of course, because we're using the Gregorian calendar here, the phases of the moon shows clearly from the fraction of the moon, though calculated in the phase, now that the observation will be a day after. Having established now, specifically for 1844, we wanted to establish April and September, October, April, May, September, October. And in the case of a common year, usually you will have your new moon and of course the feast of Passover all in April. And the month of May is usually when you can deal also with the month of April for a Passover embalming, but it's very late in the month of April. And then the month of May will kind of finish the first month. That happens regularly. And you can actually analyze all this. We have given you here some links that you can observe and check of the dates and the data that we have already calculated for 2020, 2030. So it's very easily available. So now if we understand carefully what we have seen, we can now return to April 1844, where we have established the new moon conjunction on the 20th, and the one that is to be observed as the new moon conjunction, I should say, on the 18th, and then the horn crescent on the 20th, and then celebrated, if they had celebrated the new moon, on the 21st. So this legend here is very well explained in our links, why we choose all these colors. It's making it easier to read. So we go now to the full moon for the first month, which would correspond to May the 3rd. And according to Aristobulus and Gemini in history, 500 years before Christ, the Passover was always celebrated the day after the full moon and not on it. So according to the Millerite writings, they did establish the Feast of Passover in the spring as being on the 3rd of May at sunset. And if they had celebrated it, they would have celebrated it on 3rd and 4th of May, being again the 14th of Abib, or the 14th of the first month. Now, you always have to establish the spring feast in order to establish the fall feast. You cannot do reverse. It has to be the spring feast which established the fall feast. Why? Because once you have established your spring feast, you can easily calculate your 6 months, as we have done here in the chart below, and then you will come up with where to find your fall feast. And in the case of 1844, being an embalming year, we have established that the moon of October, the black moon of October the 12th, is the one we're going to use to establish number 1 here. That would be your visible crescent. And then from there, you can actually have the horn crescent at 0.2, and from there, the 14. So it would have been celebrated 1314, according to the writing of the Millerites. And then from here, which is the Feast of Trumpets, you will count 10 days and you reach to the evening of the 22nd, 23rd as your Day of Atonement. This is how the Millerite proceeded. They may not have had the data for the fraction of the moon eliminated. They use another methods, astronomical methods, but they definitely had the phases of the moon of 1844, as the USNO in the United States of America Observatory existed at the time in the 1800. It was established in the 1800. So we pray and hope that you will take time to revise these rules of correspondence, which are further established and maybe more clearly with the calendar here that we present to you with the links here. And it's called Computation of the Biblical Calendar. And we go step by step with all the graphic for 2020. And now we have also a video showing it. That's the PDF, the video, and then other important links that we present to you. So this was in order to show you the rules of correspondence that we took this time in showing you first the new moon and showing you that you can do the same with the other phases of the moon. And of course, the full moon is fully identified with that color. And so now we have established that when the phases of the moons are compared to the fraction of the moon illuminated, there seemed to be an apparent discrepancy, as you saw, because of the 11th hour. However, the explanation offered in the Grace Amadon collection of the calculated and consecrated new moon, and by Leslie Harding, which we saw earlier, of the sanctified new moon, which is observed, eliminates this apparent discrepancy. You need the phases of the moon and the fraction of the moon and the 11th hour rule of correspondence to understand this fully. The computation of the phases of the moon points to the calculated new moon. The fraction of the moon illuminated confirm the consecrated or sanctified new moon, and thus complement each other for their accuracy and trustworthiness. It also reinstates the ancient method of observation of the consecrated or sanctified new moon, horn crescent, in the Hebrew temple in use until the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem in 70 AD, confirming that the biblical calendar based on the barley harvest rather than the equinox was still in use at the time of Christ's death. And this is our presentation on the solid foundation of 1844 with the rules of correspondence, which establishes the basis on how to calculate and observe any future or even past calendar of the Bible, the biblical calendar or biblical time. In the next presentation, in the next slides, we will establish more about the barley harvest and the equinox. Evidence number 4, the solid foundation forming the platform of Revelation chapter 14, verses 6 to 12, Daniel chapter 8, and Daniel chapter 9 of the 2300 days calculation, bringing us to October 22nd in 1844. The Rabbinites' fixed calendar based on the equinox. The Grace Amadon collection, crucifixion date, part 5, page 30. The Mosaic ceremony connected with the barley harvest, so vital in its control of the Jewish year, did not long survive the first century of the Christian era because of the dispersion of the Jews in 70 AD. The period of persecution which followed the fall of the Second Temple ultimately brought about a fixed calendar for the Jews, one that was based upon an entirely different rule of intercalation than the ancient barley harvest regulation, namely the vernal equinox. About the 8th century AD, the Karaites arose to oppose the influence of the Rabbinites' fixed calendar and to restore the barley harvest schedule as the important index to regulate the leap year. This controversy over the Hebrew calendar raged for several centuries. It really represented a rivalry between Palestine and Babylon for the prerogative of keeping time for the Jewish nation. Though the Karaites were biblically correct, in the end the Babylonian Jews gained control of the calendar and Karaism dwindled. Since 1780, the Karaites, of which the Millerites followed the original barley harvest-based computation, have been slowly compromising with the Rabbinites on this question and today follow a fixed calendar. Evidence number 4, the solid foundation of Daniel chapters 8 and 9 of the 2300 days calculated at its termination with October 22nd in 1844 as the Great Day of Atonement. We cannot close this research without adding this important and often unknown fact of history. The rabbinical Jews in 1844 celebrated the Day of Atonement or Yom Kippur on September 23rd and not on October 22nd. In fact, they corrected the Millerites on this point, as can be read in the Grace Amadon Collection manuscript, and which we showed earlier with the two charts of the phases of the moon and the fraction of the moon illuminated. And we know that the Millerite knew that the rabbinical Jews had compromised with the method of calculation of the biblical calendar according to the Karaites in history by changing the barley harvest for the spring equinox of March 21st and from using the first full moon after the vernal or spring equinox as the Passover and dating it the 15 of the first month instead of the 14 of the first month according to Exodus chapter 12 verse 6 and Leviticus chapter 23 verse 5, even as they do to this day. We encourage you to study further and follow up with all these wonderful truths by studying this link very carefully. Evidence number 4, continuing with the conclusion. The Millerites were correct. October 22nd stands without impeachment. September 23rd, according to chart number 2, which we saw, cannot be the Day of Atonement in 1844 for these following reasons. A. The new moon horned crescent was and is the phase of the moon used to ascertain the new month, which the rabbinical Jews have changed along with the vernal equinox. B. When using the horned crescent, September 23rd fails to meet the test of time, while October 22nd passes the test. C. The spring feast of Passover cannot be in April in 1844, and neither can the Day of Atonement be in September, because that year was an embollismic year instead of a common year, which the Millerite acknowledged, but which the rabbinical Jews ceased to recognize ever since they replaced the barley harvest as prescribed by the Creator through Moses for the vernal equinox. The barley ascertains even to this day the agricultural season to reckon the spring or beginning of the biblical year. The embollismic year, which occurs every 2 to 3 years, makes up the difference of 11 days between the cycle of the moon, the lunar cycle being 354 days, and the cycle of the sun, the solar cycle of 365 days. By intercalating an extra month, the seasons do not wander like the Islamic lunar calendar, for example, and the feast of the Lord are observed at the right times and seasons. Evidence number 4, conclusion. D. Another important reason, and not the least, why the Passover cannot be in April in 1844 and the Day of Atonement in September is because of the change of the rule of evidence established specifically by the Roman Catholic Church according to history and imposed on the Jews in regard to the new moon conjunction on or after the vernal equinox. Chart 2 shows that the rabbinical Jews did not obey nor follow that rule in 1844 as they do often, especially when the year is an embollismic one. In 1844, notice that the conjunction is March 19. Therefore, the rabbinical Jews ignored the rule of evidence on or after March 21st and used the full moon of April 3rd for the Passover that year, making September the 7th month instead of October, thus ignoring the embollismic year. As written in their papers, the Millerites knew the rule of the barley, preserved by the Karaites till the 1700 era, and did not ascertain the Day of Atonement till the month of October, Gregorian reckoning, as the true 7th month, since Passover was reckoned by them as May 3rd at sunset in the spring, the celebration being the day following the sighting of the full moon at sunset and not on the day of the full moon. We encourage you to visit these links in PDF format and in video to increase your knowledge and to increase also the settling into the truth so that you shall never be moved. Evidence number 5, the flood, calculation and observation. The Flood Chronicle, Grace Amadon Collection. Genesis chapter 8, verse 22. While the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. The flood year, as depicted in the book of Genesis, is represented by a definitely outlined calendar. This is constructed in two kinds of time, solar and lunar, and it is also conforms to known positions of both sun and moon. With reference to the flood calendar itself, it would appear that we have in Genesis 7 and 8 the simplest form of lunar calendar, and one upon which the solar year also is planted. Questions relating to the authorship of the book of Genesis are partly answered in the book itself. The fact that the months are numbered and not designated by name, not even the ancient Canaanite names of the month appear in the text, speak for an early writer. Furthermore, it can be demonstrated that in the flood record, the lunar numbering begins in the autumn with the month later denominated seventh in biblical history. Philo, Josephus, the Talmud, and scholarship in general each supports this conclusion. An additional proof that the flood year began in the autumn is forthcoming from instances in Genesis that relate the year to agricultural operations. But after the Exodus, and at least until the establishment of the monarchy, the year was reckoned from the spring, according to Exodus chapter 12, verse 2. This answer to the question of authorship points the finger at Moses, as the early writer required, for he was an early writer. Evidence number 5, the flood, calculation and observation. The Flood Chronicle, taken from the Flood Chronicle Grace Amadon Collection, for which we give you the link for your perusal. Before the flood and for some time after, there had been no books, but there were teachers whose existence was measured by centuries. Methuselah knew Adam for nearly 250 years, according to Genesis chapter 5. And Noah knew the family in which Abraham was reared, and Shem was still alive at the time of Abraham and Isaac, according to Genesis chapters 10 and 11. By this means, knowledge was extended at a time when books had not yet been written. And one of the earliest testimonies concerning this marvelous period comes from the hand of one who lived many centuries later. This fact alone is of outstanding importance to the genesis of ancient calendation, for it reveals the existence of an exceedingly early calendaric record that was constructed by calculation of the new moon, yet not based upon more ancient tabulation, instead of by actual observation. Evidence number 5, the flood, calculation and observation. The nature and character of the Genesis calendar in chapters 7 and 8 is of essential importance. That the flood calendar was also calculated and not based upon new moon observation only seems without controversy. Furthermore, there is no direct evidence that any written sources were at Moses' command. Moreover, the months had been originally calculated and determined by consecrated and observed moons, 14 in number. Therefore, they would have presented a series of 29 days and 30 days periods for the Genesis reckoning. And hereby is lifted the uncertainty which has hitherto challenged the whole problem of the ancient lunar months, namely, what happened to the calendar when the moon is not seen. Every scripture date is an answer to this question, for all dates in the Bible respond to calculated new moons, as the Synchronisms reveal, and is now further supported by the reckoning in Genesis chapter 7 and 8. This again was extracted from the Flood Chronicle, the Grace Abaddon collection, for which we give you the link for your perusal. Evidence number 6, the Mazzaroth, calculation and observation. The Mazzaroth is made up of 12 cardinal constellations in their seasons and 36 decan constellations. The Mazzaroth is actually composed of 3 books, made up of 4 cardinal constellations per book. As we look at the Mazzaroth, we can declare that it is actually the first book or books written by the finger of the Creator himself and placed in the sky to reveal the wonderful plan of redemption. He gave the numbers of the star and their names. And every one of these constellations, both the cardinal and the decans, actually have a story to tell. The Mazzaroth can be compared to the sanctuary, which has 3 compartments, the court, the holy, and the most holy. And surely we see the wisdom of the Creator as he brings together through the Mazzaroth and the sanctuary his wonderful plan of creation, redemption, and true education, which are one. Evidence number 6, the Mazzaroth, calculation and observation. The Mazzaroth proclaims the connection and unity of all the prophecies fulfilled and to be fulfilled by Messiah through the most complete, connected, and harmonious system of truth of the Bible, the sanctuary. These prophecies are the first coming of Messiah, his birth, death on the cross, resurrection, ascension to heaven, his works in the court, holy and most holy place, and his second and third coming. These universal laws are illustrated through the Mazzaroth and the biblical synchronisms and chronology. And it connects the woman of Revelation chapter 12 with the final events of earth history and the bride and the bridegroom, the 144,000 and the Son of Righteousness, the ultimate vindication of the character of God through the plan of redemption and his people as witnesses. We invite you to visit these links of PDF and video of Volume 1, Volume 2, and Volume 3 of a study on the Mazzaroth. Evidence number 7, Christ's birth and death, calculation, observation. Spirit of Prophecy, Volume 4, pages 196-197. God saw in 1844 that many of his professed people were not building for eternity, and in his care and love, he was about to send a message of warning to arouse them from their stupor and prepare them for the coming of their Lord. The warning was not to be entrusted to learned doctors of divinity or popular ministers of the gospel. Had these been faithful watchmen, diligently and prayerfully searching the scriptures, they would have known the time of night. The prophecies of Daniel and John would have revealed to them the great events about to take place. If they had faithfully followed the light already given, some star of heavenly radiance would have been sent to guide them into all truth. At the time of Christ's first advent, the priests and scribes of the holy city, to whom were entrusted the oracles of God, should have discerned the signs of the times and proclaimed the coming of the promised one. The prophecy of Micah designated his birthplace, found in Micah chapter 5, verse 2. Daniel specified the time of his advent, Daniel chapter 9, verse 25. God had committed these prophecies to the Jewish leaders. Therefore, they were without excuse if they did not know and declare to the people that the Messiah's coming was at hand. Their ignorance was the result of sinful neglect. God did not send his messengers to the palaces of kings, to the assemblies of philosophers, or to the schools of the rabbis, to make known the wonderful fact that the Redeemer of man was about to appear upon the earth. The Jews were building monuments for the slain prophets of God, while by their deference to the great men of the earth, they were paying homage to the servants of Satan. Absorbed in their ambitious strife for place and power among men, they lost sight of the divine honors proffered them by the King of heaven. The restitution of all things, the biblical calendar, calculation, and observation. The Desire of Ages, page 769. In the beginning, the Father and the Son had rested upon the Sabbath after their work of creation. When the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the hosts of them, the Creator and all heavenly beings rejoiced in contemplation of the glorious scene. The morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Now Jesus rested from the work of redemption, and though there was grief among those who loved him on earth, yet there was joy in heaven. Glorious to the eyes of heavenly beings was the promise of the future. A restored creation, a redeemed race, that having conquered sin could never fall. This the result to flow from Christ's completed work, God and angels saw. With this scene, the day upon which Jesus rested is forever linked, for his work is perfect, and whatsoever God doeth, it shall be forever. When there shall be a restitution of all things, which God hath spoken by the mouth of all his holy prophets since the world began, the creation Sabbath, the day on which Jesus lay at rest in Joseph's tomb, will still be a day of rest and rejoicing. Heaven and earth will unite in praise as from one Sabbath to another, the nations of the saved shall bow in joyful worship to God and the Lamb. All these evidences need to be re-examined in the light of the Great Day of Atonement computation of October 22nd, 1844, for it is so bold, so utterly non-conventional, and so potentially upsetting, radically altering the central aspects of the biblical, astronomical, chronological, historical, cultural, economic, and political understanding of most people, it should not be ignored. We intend, through this calendar restoration, to begin a most interesting debate and critical discussion of all relevant issues, for the last great conflict may have just begun. We invite you to visit biblicalcalendarmovement.org for further information on the change of the calendar throughout history, and inviting you to participate in this great movement. We also want you to make sure that you visit this link on 1844, demonstrating without a shadow of a doubt to the validity of the position of October 22nd, 1844, which was revised in 1939 by the scholars of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, showing without a shadow of a doubt that the biblical calendar is worthy to be restored, showing as well all the changes that have been brought into this wonderful calendar. And this is why we have taken the time to present to you this session on the biblical calendar, because we believe that only October 22nd, 1844 computation demonstrates without a shadow of a doubt which of the biblical calendar that are right now being taught by many groups, which one is the true one. There cannot be more than one. It cannot be. We rest our case.